Um, what I found very interesting today in your speech at this law planning conference was that you really had what seemed to me like a solid ground to put all this on. You seem to be mainly looking at United States code, the United States body of laws, not any foreign jurisdiction here,
Right.
not anything outside our constitutional order, and you seem to be on pretty solid ground here. What is your main playing field, your body of law here? What parts of the U.S. code title this, and
Okay,
what
Bush
parts?
can be prosecuted and convicted if there's evidence there of two crimes, conspiracy to commit murder and murder. On a federal level, the statute is section 1111 subdivision. Is this taped or is it going to be, what do you call it? Because I just stuttered.
That's okay,
That's fine.
Go on.
Okay. Federally, the murder statute is section 1111 subdivision A of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. He can be prosecuted for murder under that statute. I've also established jurisdiction for the Attorney General in each of the 50 states, plus the approximately 2,700 district attorneys in counties within those states, to prosecute George Bush for the murder of any soldier or soldiers from their state or county who died fighting George Bush's war in Iraq. So what we're talking about here is basically one prosecutor on a federal level, the Attorney General, but over 2,700 on a state and local level that can go after him. I spent an enormous amount of time on jurisdiction here. To give you an example of why jurisdiction is so important, Bush is also responsible for the over 100,000 innocent Iraqi men, women, children, and babies who have died during this war, but I was unable to establish jurisdiction here in America to prosecute him for those murders. But I was able to establish jurisdiction to prosecute him for the over 4,000 American soldiers who have died so far fighting his war. By the way, the International Criminal Court at The Hague, the ICC, has no jurisdiction here. Why? Because the United States was not a signatory nation to the ICC when it was formed in Rome in 2002. So there's no jurisdiction. So Bush can only be prosecuted, if at all, here in the United States on a local, state, or federal level.
Interesting, and there are a lot of appeals today at this program about what about the International Criminal Court, what about trying them in foreign tribunals. And what I found striking and logical about your approach was that first things first, the U.S. law speaks to these things,
right,
and you use our playing field at least first and foremost before you try anything else. Is there a chance of establishing some sort of jurisdiction for the Iraqi deaths, the civilian deaths?
Well, there's some talk at this conference here about establishing an independent tribunal, apparently, that would have jurisdiction to prosecute Bush on an international level.
Would it have a sound footing? Would it have standing?
That I do not know. I've limited myself to existing law. You follow?
Yeah.
There's no state
where else to start, really?
Yeah, there's no state or federal murder statute that says it only applies to certain people, not to presidents or engineers or golf pros or hairstylists, okay? Nor does any state or federal murder statute say that the killing has to happen in certain places, like a car, a home out in the street, not a battlefield. So we already have laws in place, already in America, murder statutes. And the only question is there evidence against Bush showing that he violated those statutes?
I think one of the things in just every person's way of thinking, the way we've been imbued with how we view our government and in the act of war and what happens when governments go to war, is somehow wars are an exception to all civilized behavior.
I know that.
And that's, I guess that's one almost impenetrable or seemingly impenetrable thing you got to get around, is this notion that wars are excusable, that any other kind of murder should be dealt with. But a war is a different thing.
No, I get that. I get that wherever I go.
Right, and I don't believe that, but I know a lot of people do.
I know that. And people who haven't read my book say, Mr. Bugliosi, I've read your books. I respect you. What's happened to you? You lost your marbles? And I'll say, have you read the book? Answer, always no. Those who have read this book take it very, very seriously.
This might be an antidote to what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
That war is an excusable enterprise, no matter how terrible.
You know, I've written about the biggest crimes of the 20th century, the Manson case, the Simpson case, the Kennedy assassination. And in every one of those books, I prove my case beyond a reasonable doubt, which is exactly what I do in this book. This book, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder, is no different than any other true crime book I've ever written. I present the evidence and the applicable law to prove my case. To the argument that war is different, you know, I've said this to people. Let's take a hypothetical example. president has a mistress, young mistress, and for whatever reason, she doesn't think he's a macho guy. So he takes the nation to war with China under false pretenses. And over 50 million Americans die. Is it your position that because it's war, we shouldn't do anything to him? He doesn't even have to spend one day in the county jail? And of course they say, well, you know, under that type of situation. Well,
oh, you're being extreme now.
Yeah. Where are you going to draw the line? No, war is not an exception. Not that I'm aware of. I've heard people say that, but where's the law on it? Where's the law in America? The law in America that says if you take the nation to war, even if it's on a lie, under false pretenses, you have immunity from prosecution. I'd like to see any statute or any case law on that point.
Yes, I think that it's imperative from a news standpoint, and no doubt from your perspective, from a legal standpoint, that this become something looked at tangibly. That is, we don't just get off on wild legal theories, that we have to look at, would this actually work?
Right.
We know what very likely the president did wrong, but realistically, what is the body of law we'd rely on? What's the legal playing field?
It's already in place.
It's there, and I think that's the news today. It's there. Oftentimes, I think we find that the tools for our redress of grievances are right smack in front of us, and we just don't utilize them. We go looking beyond our shores. We go looking into fanciful theories. We don't realize that we do have the power. It's the will and the courage, is it not?
That's right. We need the will and the courage, because I say this. If America can allow a president to take this nation to war under false pretenses, and as a result, over 100,000 people are in their cold graves right now as I'm talking to you, and we do nothing to that president, this nation is not worth a tinker's damn, okay? We can't allow that to happen.
Interesting. Also, I would mention, I'd be amiss not to mention in this news segment, before we wind up here, that some people that have been in the Army a long time, that have worked in the healthcare fields and that have cleaned up battlefields from in terrible situations, have talked about that the real war dead beyond the 4,000 KIAs killed in action could be as high as 100,000 or higher for all those soldiers that were injured and died later, that got sick and died later.
Of course.
And granted, you said earlier that sometimes, like suicides, you can get into too speculative of a situation for a court of law. But nevertheless, the real war dead, even conservatively, is estimated in this conflict alone at upwards of 100,000 or more.
I hadn't heard that.
Counting all deaths.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that.
Counting suicides too, but
right.
You know, many die a year or two later of tangible known illnesses.
But if I were to prosecute Bush, I would not get into those tangential things. They may be valid, but
But for the purposes
it dilutes your case in front of the jury to start getting into areas that you can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. My point is, and I see your point there, and I think it's very good. My point is that there seems to be something in the American psyche that says we haven't had big enough losses in this war to really get really angry about it. And when I see that 4,000 number, I think, you know, that number is really more like 100,000. Counting everyone who was ever sick or injured as a result of that war and died later, not just on the battlefield or soon thereafter. And I think if those kind of numbers were out there, even though it'd be hard to argue it in court, as you say, if those kind of numbers were out there, the real war dead, and that maybe the Iraqi civilian deaths are upwards of 1 million and not 100,000.
Right. And I take those deaths hard too. My wife and I, when we read in the paper that 100 innocent Iraqis were blown up in a mosque or a market, I take that hard too. You follow?
Yes.
So we got to be concerned about that. These are innocent Iraqi men, women, children, and babies.
Correct.
Who have died horrible, violent deaths because of this guy, George Bush. And I want to make it clear that I might not succeed, but I'm not going to be satisfied until I see Bush in an American courtroom being prosecuted for first-degree murder. And if he's convicted, it'll be up to the jury to decide the appropriate punishment. As I pointed out today, one of the options would be the imposition of the death penalty.